Hey friends, welcome back to another episode, the last episode, of the CarrotCast. Trevor and I are sitting here and we have huge changes coming to the podcast and some awesome things are coming down the pipeline over the next week or two. And we want to tell you about them, what they are, and just talk about our journey with this podcast over the last, for me, only over the last 5 years or so, but Trevor, 7, 8 years ago, he started the podcast. 2016. 8 years on a podcast. So we've got some new shows we wanted to announce to you and just talk about our journey and just let you guys know what's happening with the podcast. So what are we doing, Trevor?
Dude, it's wild to even say it's the last CarrotCast, man. Yeah. We're in this episode. I mean, what Brady and I were talking before we hit record here. We're going to talk about why we started the podcast in the first place. We're going to talk about where we're going. Which I'm way excited about. We've already recorded the first 6 episodes of the 2 new shows that we've got coming.
Yeah.
So we'll tell you guys what we're doing. We're talking about what we learned. I think there's just so many lessons when you do 500 plus of anything. I don't care if it's 500 podcasts or 500 videos or 500 push-ups. Like, you're going to learn something. You're going to grow. And so we'll share what we learned. Another note I've got on here is like, people might ask, well, what value has the podcast been for the business?
Yeah.
I want to cover that a little bit on here too.
A lot of people don't like, they want to start a podcast and they don't know why, or they're like, I don't know why I would. Yeah. So we can talk about that.
Dude, anything else pop up that you want to unpack in this last ever CarrotCast?
That's pretty much most of it. We'll unpack it in a minute, but before we kind of start talking about that, let me just give you guys the meat. Here's what's happening. So if you're subscribed to the CarrotCast, this is going to be rebranded as of March 12th as Evergreen Marketing. And so you're going to come into your podcast app. You're going to be like, what the heck happened to the CarrotCast? Why can't I find it anymore? Where's the orange square? It's going to become the Evergreen Marketing Podcast. And that's because we're going all in on Evergreen Marketing. We're doubling down on Evergreen Marketing, and we're narrowing our focus for the podcast. So what that means is the Truck Talks. What's happening in the Truck Talks is those are going to become their own separate show. So, Trevor, you're launching your podcast called the Entrepreneur Freedom Formula.
Yep.
And we'll make sure on future episodes to put a link in the show notes. We'll send emails so you guys don't miss it. But the Truck Talks are moving to its own separate podcast. We're going back to weekly. Trevor's going to have the Entrepreneur Freedom Formula starting March 12th. And then Thursday on March 14th, we're going to start our first rendition of Evergreen Marketing Live. So we're doing the live show.
Yep.
Join us in the Evergreen Marketing Facebook group, community.carrot.com. We're going to go live on there. We're going to do the podcast live and then answer questions, do Q&A. And then I'm going to be taking the trimmed down version of that audio from the podcast, put it in the feed so you guys can have a really juicy, tactical marketing advice every single week, from like SEO, paid ads, conversion, all those topics. It's going to be a new tactical format that we've never done before. So we're going to do that every week. And then, is this the last CarrotCast? It is technically the last CarrotCast. We're sunsetting that name, but I'm still going to be doing the interviews with people every other week. So I'm still going to be talking with our customers, members, and other great marketers. And we're still going to keep that up every other week. If you guys ever have any ideas or something you want to hear about on the podcast or an idea for guests, email me, brady@carrot.com. But that's not going anywhere. But we're doubling down on Evergreen Marketing.
Good.
Did I miss anything?
It's a lot. It's a lot. I swear it's way more simple than it might have sounded right there, guys. But at the end of the day, I'm going to kind of take us way to the end. Like, why are we doing this? Then let's kind of go all the way back to why did we start it in the first place, right? And so why are we making the changes after 500 episodes? It's right around 500, right?
Yeah. We've actually done over 560, but because we played our own numbering system, some didn't get numbers, like Truck Talks back in the day. We did some series with Adrian. We didn't number them, but episode, and
there's been some replays. Like, do the republishers count in that 560?
A few of them, but we're easily over like 550, 560
it's
actual
plus
episodes.
500. So at the end of the day, guys, there's a couple things. So as we've been going and growing as a company, so once again, why are we doing it? Where are we going? It can get really easy to not be crazy clear what your message is that you're just going to go all in on, right? And over the course with the podcast, and this is one of the benefits, I'll kind of go into some of the things I learned. I found, dude, that the podcast, like, one of the best things for me from the podcast is that I could throw spaghetti in the wall with the podcast. right? Oftentimes, some of the things that became a framework or a model or literally evergreen marketing came by me saying it on a podcast one time. I'm like, whoa, I'd never said it that way before.
Yeah.
And then I'd bring it on a webinar, bring it over here. And so when you have the podcast, you can throw spaghetti in the wall. And one of those things that stuck was evergreen marketing, right? We've done a bunch of webinars on the topic. People are talking about it. We own evergreenmarketing.com that we should probably actually turn that into the podcast deal. Let's turn that into the podcast, the actual podcast website. But we have all these things, but around evergreen marketing. I'm writing a little announcement. Just signed the agreement with the book writer yesterday.
Oh snap!
For Evergreen Marketing book.
Pressure's on.
It is. Dan Martell's writer, the same guy who wrote about Buy Back Your Time, is working with me to write this book, which I'm pumped about. So we're going all in on this topic of evergreen marketing.
Yeah. And
when we looked at it, we're going, shoot, over the years, we threw a lot of spaghetti around and some of it stuck, and it wasn't all intentional sticking together, right? Yeah. The Facebook group or our community that we had internal before we moved to the Facebook group, it was just the community, right?
Yeah.
And then we had this thing over here and it was just called this thing. Like all these things were named different. And it was getting kind of confusing on, well, what the heck are we about? And what are we really doubling down on? What do we want to own?
Right.
And so coming into this year, one of our big efforts was we're going to expand who we can reach. One of the challenges with the CarrotCast is it's amazing for someone who knows about Carrot, right? The CarrotCast. But it's not amazing for trying to expand our reach and expand our audience because no one's looking for a podcast about carrots anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So this is going to adjust to people who are looking to grow in marketing and specifically evergreen marketing. So pumped about that. And then the other part that I'll toss it your way, Brady, is another spaghetti in the wall that happened during that was I was behind on podcasts years ago, and Brendan, when he was running the podcast, he would text me and he's like, dude, I need a podcast tomorrow. And it's like, while I'm driving home from Klamath Falls was the first ever truck talk I made. Yeah. And so I recorded the podcast episode on my phone, sent it over to him.
Enabler.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm dude, just throw this on there, like upload it, upload it. Because I did the other episodes were interviews where I think I did a couple like at my computer with Audacity or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I sent it over to him. And I just kind of kept doing it. I'm like, oh, that kind of worked. The audio quality is a little bit lower, but then we would get so many comments from people. And we would get people at events or carrot camps coming up and going like that episode or this episode. And so we kept that going and made it an official thing once you took over.
Yeah.
Made it the actual truck talks.
Right.
But I think both of those were so knowledgeable and so amazing at marketing. We're going, no, we want to be better at it. We want to be the leading source for all things inbound evergreen marketing and all of real estate and any industry we expand into. We want this to be the spot where when you think about Carrot and our podcasts and our video channels, you think about marketing. Right. And then we go, as you get really good at marketing, grow your business, then you need to be able to know how to run your business. Right. You need to know how to go through that entrepreneur journey. And that's where the Entrepreneur Freedom Formula is going to have its own home now.
Yeah. There's plenty enough podcasts on like how to wholesale real estate or how to start an investing business. There's enough coaches and friends of Carrots that do that really well. Yeah. And we teetered that line sometimes, but it's like, why not just double down on what we're good at, Yeah. And so, yeah.
So everything in that podcast now is going to be about marketing.
Yeah.
Which is cool. Because if someone was looking for my entrepreneur stuff, they would never find it unless they found our CarrotCast podcast, but they were probably looking for marketing when they found it. So now we're going to be able to expand audience and go crazy deep on both topics.
Yeah, man. Well, let's talk about, it's crazy. As you're talking through this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like bringing back all these memories. I forgot like when Truck Talks wasn't its own thing.
Yeah.
And then like, man, we just dated the podcast and saying like using Audacity, like back in the day, like I don't even know if people still know what Audacity is, like recording in that.
2016, man. Yeah.
Podcasting has changed a lot, man. Side note, I didn't even think about, I hear all the time, like, well, podcast, they're way too podcasts. I don't think that's true. It's like people were saying the same thing back in like, I started working for Carrot in like 2018, fall of 2018. Mm-hmm. And people were like, oh, podcasts are flooded. And they're still booming. It's still, if you look at it on a chart, just more and more every day. It's not quite flooded yet.
And there are a lot of podcasts, but most are garbage, right? I think going into lessons learned, right? There are a lot of podcasts, but there's very few who do 500 episodes.
Yeah.
Very few.
So the stat is somewhere between the 7 and 11, depending on who's reporting it. But like, most podcasts will make it past 7 or 11 episodes. And like
Mhm.
Apple doesn't remove dead podcasts or antiquated podcasts. And so
Yeah.
you look up stats like, oh, over 2 million, 3 million podcasts. Like, well, most of those aren't happening.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's another tangent. But yeah, let's talk about some of the lessons and things we've enjoyed about the podcast. I know for me, before we record, one of the things I was talking about, I think it's for myself, it's the biggest relationship builder we have,
Yeah.
so whether that's with like affiliates or partners of Carrot or other coaches, or just our customers, like it's just a heck of a relationship building tool, because it opens up the door when you have a platform that otherwise you wouldn't be able to have conversations. And so I think one of the pitches I was most proud of, or one of the guests was like, we got Greg McEwen, the author of
Dude,
Essentials, on the
that was fun,
podcast.
man.
That was like, I was through a Hail Mary, it worked. And it's like, we have a platform, and with the right time and the right pitch, you can talk to anyone you want.
Some amazing authors. Greg, A. Papazan with The One Thing.
Yeah.
Mike McAllowitz way back in the day. That was before you. I mean, there's many others
anyone
as
in
well.
the industry. I mean, like Max Maxwell, Pace Morby, Brian Daniels. Like when you have a platform, and it's funny, a lot of times, like we're a pretty big podcast for our space, but nobody really asks, like, is it worth my time? How big a podcast? Nobody cares. It's like, yeah, it's a podcast. I'll hop on.
Yeah. So, Bob Berg, Go
Giver. We had him on twice, I think.
Dude. So one thing that popped into my mind around value and relationships. So if you're listening to this, you're probably a real estate investor, real estate agent, HVAC would be just a friend of ours too, but might be asking, well, cool, Trevor and Brady are talking about their podcast that they've been running for years. Why should I care about this? Right. Well, I feel if you're running any business that actually wants to build a relationship and actually gets benefit and value from building authority and trust, which is like all of them, except for maybe your local mini mart, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
But you are going to benefit from getting in front of an audience consistently and just sharing what's on your mind. I know people who do hyper local podcasts where it's just in this city. When I was on this last week with Al Nicoletti, he's there in Florida, and I don't know what he does in distribution, but he's hyper local in a couple spots. Now anyone can get it on Apple Podcasts and stuff, but there's something where it's like he did it because it's mostly local people.
Yeah. And it's crazy, even without like any marketing, word of mouth spreads like crazy, because there's not, again, like I was saying, not a lot of people are doing that in podcasts. If I had a nickel for every time I run into somewhere around town, I'm like, oh, Carrot comes up and like, oh yeah, you guys do like the YouTube and the podcast, you know, for the podcast or whatever. I'm like, yeah, it's crazy how fast word of mouth spreads.
In introduction, so you're talking about the relationship side. I remember before we had the CarrotCast, it was around the time that it started. I read Mike McAllowitz's book, The Pumpkin Plant, right? And I didn't have a podcast at that time. I probably got the recording somewhere. It'd be a blast finding that recording again. But 2 or 3 times in those early days when I just wanted to talk to a person, I reached out to him, told him I had a podcast. I truly intended to make one someday. I just didn't have one at the time. Like, I'd love to record a podcast episode with you. And they said yes. And so I'm literally reading the book. I shut it at page 16. It's one of the most impactful books in that time of my life. I shut it at 16. I'm like, I got exactly what I need from the book. I'm going to go talk to the actual guy who wrote this book now.
Yeah.
And so I hit him up on Twitter and said, hey, Mike, love the book. Got this out of it. Here's would you be able to hop on? And I just recorded, asked him all the questions I wanted to ask. And you know what? Other people are interested to hear that. People want to hear you talk to the person that you're interested in learning from. And it's such an amazing gift that when we can have a conversation and share it with others and just kind of hoard that knowledge for ourselves, that's one of the cool things about a podcast.
Yeah.
As we get to do that. It's cool.
Yeah. I wish, I've said this on the podcast multiple times, but I'm really surprised that maybe it's just too much time suck. I don't know, but I don't see or know of any investors, like wholesalers, flippers that are starting their own community podcast. A few agents have done that, and agents cling to the YouTube strategy faster than investors do. We were talking about that recently. But it's crazy because it's such a powerful thing. Just having conversations with other business people, business owners in your community, whoever, and just being known as the connector and just having an outlet to be able to talk about what you do. And yeah, it's crazy.
Dude, talk about the market, talk about situations, talk about the interest rate changes, talk about anything at all.
Yeah.
One challenge, Brady, that I see that people have is they have these like grandiose ideas for how many subscribers and how many
Yeah.
reviews that they need. So we're 500 episodes in, million plus
Probably
downloads.
close to 2 million. Yeah, something. Yeah.
Some millions of downloads, and we have pretty darn respectable number of reviews. It's like 300, 400, almost 5-star. I think it's 4.8, 4.9.
Yeah.
And we've been doing this for years and years and years with millions of reviews. Like, you don't have to be one of those giant podcasts that has 13,000, reviews on it. If you're locally and you have 4 reviews and it's the people you're working with the most, and you get 30 people a week listening to it, that's 30 people a week.
A lot of podcasts have no reviews. I've seen podcasts for years that don't have any reviews. I'm like, yeah, you get 4 reviews and you're local, you're killing it. You get 10, you're like a rock star in your community.
Dude, and the thing with a podcast, the deeper you go in, the more niche you go. You don't need that giant audience, right? So we get whatever that is. It's well into the tens of thousands of downloads we get a month. And over time, we've looked at it and went like, well, what is the value of the podcast, right? And I always look at it and go, there's nowhere else I can get in front of whatever that number is. I'm going to make up a number, but there's nowhere else I can get my message, or you can get your message in front of 500 or 1,000 people. There's nowhere else in our company we can do that predictably every single week.
Right. Yeah.
And so we get to build that relationship over time. You get to access essentially people's mind space, but you have to treat it with care, right? We've got to make sure we're adding value, and we're not just subtracting value from people all the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love podcasts. It's just it's unmatched. It's not noisy like YouTube or blogs. It's super hyper focused.
Heck yeah.
What else we got? I wrote down one of my favorite things about us is just, it's kind of like a workout. Like, as a content creator, like if you want to get better at creating content and better at asking questions and better at just being a better communicator, like podcast is one of the best forcing functions, like a workout every single week or every week, whatever, to just get better at those things. And naturally over time, you just stumble through it.
Oh, dude.
And you're going to get really concise. You're going to get better at asking questions, better at communicating, better at reading body language. That's a big deal. And that transfers to, even if nobody ever listened to your podcast, but you use it for that purpose and just talk to people, that's a win.
Dude, you could. I've recorded podcasts, deleted them after I did them because I'm like, okay, I got the message out, but it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
But at least I recorded it and got something there. And dude, there's a few. I'm gonna rattle through a few of the lessons I've learned over the since 2016 to now, so 8 years running the podcast. The first one is why I started the podcast in the first place. So you guys have heard me tell my story about where, the 3-year turn and burn cycle, where you start to adopt a bunch of work that drains your energy. And in 2016, that was the year when I almost ran my family off the road. Right, that was when I was doing all the blog posts. The blog posts were bringing in traffic, bringing in customers, was doing tech support, was doing Facebook engagement, was like literally making all the templates for the product, doing all this work. And so I would be up really, really late at night getting my blog posts done, because I'm going, blog posts are one of the things that drives business. And that, one of those nights where I'm thinking I'm doing this, I'm only harming, like, I'm not harming the family, because I'm still spending full time with my family. My computer is away, have dinner, have the evening, put the kids to bed, Carla and I get to hang out a little bit, and she'd go to bed at 10:30. I go, cool, flip up the laptop and let me now work until 1, 2, 3 in the morning most nights. And that bit me one day, where we were going to my parents' house a few hours away over the mountains here in Oregon, and middle of the afternoon, fell asleep. Right. It was after one of those kind of 3 a.m. benders where I'm going, it's not hurting anybody. Let me just plow through this phase of the business. And I wasn't delegating things very well then. I didn't know how to delegate and replace myself in some of those key areas. And when I fell asleep going 65 miles an hour up in the highway, and woke up just in time to see the guardrail, literally swerved, hit the guardrail, and then stopped dead in the middle of the road. It was within minutes after that where I'm like, this isn't sustainable. Right. I've got to change some of the things I'm doing. So the podcast actually came out of that moment, because I got home and I go, like, cold turkey, I'm not working nights or weekends anymore. And so I started leaving my computer in the truck, stopped, and I started thinking about, well, it's either I just dial the business back and keep it where it is, or I learn how to actually work through people better during this phase. It's one of those pain lines, right? Things break 100,000, 300,000, 1 million, 3 million. I think we were probably close to the million mark at that point, maybe. So things were breaking. I didn't know how to grow from 300,000 to a million, which is the delegation phase.
In revenue, not podcast.
In revenue. Yeah. And so I did my energy audit, pulled back the energy audit. I'm like, okay, what are the first things I need to get rid of? And the blog posts drained my energy, but made me money. And I'm like, I need to get rid of those because they drain my energy. So made an amazing just like documented how I wrote those blog posts, recruited a writer who ended up becoming the Shopify Plus editor-in-chief for their whole blog. His name was Aaron Orndorff. He wrote first for 2 years. He brought in Mike. And then Aaron went to work for Shopify and became the number one guy in their blog. And so that whole process, the reason I delegated the blog, so I looked at the energy audit. I'm like, okay, what am I going to trade out that gives me good energy? I'm like, I love these entrepreneurs. I love just talking to people. I go, I have no clue how I'm going to make money with this thing.
Right.
I don't care. I just want to start it. And so we just started it. It's like, we have no clue what the business model is. We have no clue how we're going to drive revenue with it. It gives me energy. It gives us an opportunity to talk with people. Let's just do it. And that's why we started it. And so that was the kickoff. A few other lessons, like you mentioned, Brady, finding your voice is such an amazing benefit from a podcast.
Oh yeah.
Your 50 episodes is probably that threshold where you start to really go, okay, I think I found it.
Yeah. It takes a while to get the legs under you.
Yeah. And I've heard that from people before, where it's like 20, 30, 40, 50 episodes. I think for me, it was a solid 40 to 50. Where you start to learn how you're talking to your audience, what your message is, the uniqueness that you want to bring.
And sometimes even what you want to talk about. Like in a lot of cases, I'd steer people, like people ask me, because I'm a podcast guy, like, hey, I want to start a podcast. Like, what do you think? What kind of tips? I'm like, okay, first one's why. And it's funny how many people are like, they're not clear on why, like just like the idea of it. And so I usually steer people away from that, but it is, and sometimes it's like, if you know a general idea, it's like, just start it and eventually you'll figure out the specifics.
You'll find your way. You'll find the voice. Like you said, putting in the reps. That's where it is. Like, put in the reps, and don't ask for anything in return from that podcast for ever. Like, literally start it with nothing in return.
We've never I don't think we've ever paid anyone to be a guest on the podcast. Never accepted money from anyone to be on the podcast.
And we don't really track any real metrics other than downloads. Like,
you just track downloads, make sure people are still listening, make sure it's growing at times. Like that's,
it'll lead to stuff. Like, I think that's one thing we as a company have had conversations and challenges of. It's like, oh, but can we tie that to a whatever metric? And
can you prove the ROI? We at one point, we almost got as granular, or I did at least, like, how can we put a dollar amount, like, per listener, subscriber, and like trying to overcomplicate it. And eventually it was like, it doesn't matter. It comes up in conversations. Oh, I listened to this podcast episode. That's our metric. People say that they listen to a thing and now they're working with us and whatever.
Yeah. And you'll never know how many people did, but you know that when I'm putting in the reps, putting the message out there, building relationship, adding value, it's going to build massive, massive value, probably many times more than we can even predict.
And the other thing, this just a quick side note on that, as far as like, is it worth the time? It's been a long time since I ran this survey, but like a while back, I was trying to figure out like where people came from, how they hear about Carrot. And when I did that, we were getting more people from guest podcasts at that time, where you were doing a lot of guest podcasts, was booking you all over, and it was more effective. But it's kind of it's two sides of the coin. The reason we're able to do that is because we had the CarrotCast listeners the whole time. It's like, we have a podcast for podcast hosts. We know what we're doing. And so that opened the door to being able to do so many guest podcasts. So
dude. The door opener is huge. Love it. Cause if you can email someone and invite them on first, if they're a person you're trying to build a relationship with, oftentimes you'll get the return invite back. Which is pretty cool. Let's see. So one of the things that pops up for me with a podcast is that I learned along the way is simplify it, and just if you focus on nothing else with the podcast, make the message first. Because with the truck talks, it wasn't studio quality, right? And there was a period of time where we were even talking about, well, let's up the quality here and do this and do that. And everything that was like a resistance piece for me that would get in the way of me doing it, I'm like, oh man, but I'm going to miss it this week because I didn't do that or whatever. So the lesson, guys, is just number one, focus on what will make it so you will actually do the work
Mhm.
and get it out. And number two, focus on message quality, number one, and then work on the audio quality.
Yeah.
I'll see so many people who work on having all this amazing equipment, audio quality is nailed, and their message is crap.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
put the reps in, work on message quality first, even on your cell phone. I mean, I don't know how many truck talks we've done where, I mean, they're literally on my cell phone on the voice note on Apple. And then I text them to you. Like, that's what the truck talks have been.
Yeah.
So we're running, an 8-figure company here, y'all. And my podcasts are on my cell phone on a free app that I text message to Brady.
Yeah.
So you have no excuses. Like, there's no excuses to be able to get this done. But audio quality is important for sure. I think if all of our episodes were like that, then it would be a different story. So we have a really high quality, high production episode over here. And then we have these ones that are kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But
keep
get
it
the message
simple,
out.
man. Yeah. My favorite, this has nothing to do with Carrot. My favorite podcast that we haven't done in a while, me and Atticus, my son, is 9 now.
That was cool.
We started it when he was 5 years old, something like that. It's called the CarrotCast.
Mm-hmm.
His nickname is Pock.
We listened to it, man. It's cool.
Dude. And it's funny. Back then it was Anchor for podcasters. Now it's now Spotify bought it. It's called Podcasting by Spotify. I don't know. Anyways, we recorded the whole thing on our phone, just sitting there right there, and we would make up stories at bedtime and just tell ridiculous stories. And you could see how many people listen. And like when I did it, when we started it, and still it was like, I don't care if anyone ever listens to this. We're doing it just because to document these important stories. And it was the most fun. And then you get a couple episodes. It's like, hey, Pock, this has like 170 views. What the heck? And then you guys are like, hey, we listened to that podcast. It was funny. And I'm like, this is great. But it was just super simple. Never cared who listened. And it was about documenting. And for you, that's kind of like a side benefit of the truck talk is that like now you as a father have this catalog of episodes that like your kids can go back and listen to some of them someday and be like, whoa, okay, I have some more insight into dad. So yeah,
dude, on that topic there, let's spend a little bit of time there. Cause I think this is something everybody can benefit from. So, this was years ago, man. I don't remember how many years ago I started saving what I call life truths on my phone. Right. Because, I don't know if y'all can relate, but you're reading something or you learn something or hear some wisdom from somebody. You're like, that's really, really good. And then you capture it somewhere. Right. It might be on a sticky note or this random thing over here or here or here. And I was doing that for years, or a note in a book. I'd circle that thing, star it,
Yeah.
And what I was starting to notice was something would happen in my life. I'm like, oh, this thing I learned, I remember it somewhere. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I want to go try to find that. And so I just started, as I'm reading, as I'm learning, as I'm growing, saving anything that jumps up to me where I'm like, no, that's like just something that we should all have embedded in our lives. And I want to carry that with me.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to hand this over to my kids or to, my team or anybody that I care about. Say, I don't know, here's some things I gathered along the way. See if they're useful for you. And that's where a lot of my podcasts come from. So as I'm learning and as I'm creating those notes, and if I have an idea or if I don't have ideas, usually I'll pull up my darn life truths and I'll go, hey, I thought this was important at some point enough to write down as a life truth. Let me also share this life truth with somebody else.
Yeah.
So when people are thinking about, well, what do I do podcast ideas on? Just start to speak your message, figure out who are you talking to, number one, what is it that you're trying to move people towards, number two, and then start to catalog ideas of things that will help people move towards where they're looking to go. And then set a time in the early days. I don't even know if we had a time when we were scheduling the podcast. Is whenever I get one to Brendan. Yeah. And so then we would do it once a month sometimes, but, and then we got under a roll. We're like, no, this is weekly. It has to happen every week.
Yeah.
And so set that weekly time or bi-weekly or whatever your time is, collect your notes, sit down, and just talk.
Yeah.
And dude, it's amazing. Like you said, then there's something to pass along, to those that you care about, even if no one else listens to it.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's the biggest thing, man. I think it's the biggest thing. The only other thing, this isn't, if anyone's curious, like on the Carrot side, how the podcast has served us as a marketing tool is that it's, if you are thinking of starting a podcast for your business, it kind of spans the entire funnel like nothing else really does. And so it's been helpful for like attracting leads and just people finding out about marketing or that are just getting into like wholesaling or real estate investing. all the way from nurturing leads to closing leads with like case studies. We've had a lot of members on the podcast. And then we have, it's a tool for our members to learn strategy and learn marketing. So it's really unique in that way, where like not other sales funnels can span. It's usually top of funnel, bottom funnel. So that's been helpful. And then the other thing, I think we already covered this, but I'll just say it, is like understanding your customer. I mean, if you're an investor and you're talking to customers all the time, you're closing deals, like that's not a big deal if you feel like you know them pretty well.
Yeah.
But it just really keeps you connected to the customer and understanding their pain points and everything. So that's super valuable.
Dude, Chris Teague, who's a new Carrot member as of December, he's a contractor, crushing it with Carrot on the contractor side of things. He has a podcast. And so if you go to his Carrot website, I think it's Elevation Construction or something like that. At the bottom, it's called the Caffeinated Contractor. And one mistake we talked about on our epic high-level group coaching call yesterday, that if people, like, sometimes we'll see an investor put their podcast on their website, but that podcast is geared toward some other audience, right? It's not for the seller. But on this one, this is for the person who's the homeowner looking to do a project. And he's interviewing a design consultant to talk about design trends for kitchens. And he's doing this, and he's doing an episode on the 5 things to think about before you hire a contractor. And I listened to a couple episodes. I'm like, dude, if he gets one customer a month to listen to that thing, they go, oh man, I trust the person more. I see where they're coming from. They're an actual human being, not just a picture on a website. The ROI, you can't track it, but it ends up being huge.
It's a huge credibility tool. I saw that on Chris's website a few days ago, and I was like, these episodes are like perfectly suited for people looking for a contractor. The topics are dialed in. I'd even listen to it, and I'm like, okay, just by looking at the episodes, like, this guy knows the stuff. He really cares about being a contractor. Same thing for an investor. Like, this guy really cares about homes and the buy and selling process. He's not just doing this to rip me off. Like, he cares enough about this to talk about it on a podcast. Okay, he's legit.
Love it, dude. Well, man, so we talked about where we started, a bunch of things. There's a million other things we learned probably along the way. Consistency. We did talk about consistency. I want to double down on that one though, because if I were to pick one thing that was like the most important thing throughout this whole journey, that's getting us to the point where we're like, hey, we're actually going to double down on our podcast bet, is consistency. Is making it happen. Did we have a few blips here or there? Yeah, we did. But in general, people could trust. They could open up their podcast app on a weekly basis and get some amazing content for us every single week for 8 years.
I think I'm just going to brag for a second. I think I missed like 2 Tuesdays in the last 5 years.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
If that.
Maybe. But yeah, we went a long time, probably like 4 years without ever missing a single episode. And that consistency is huge. To start a podcast, people need to see the new show or the episode show up in their phone every week.
I like it. Well, dude, I want to spend a couple minutes on just doubling down on clarity for people. What the heck are the new ones? Where do they go? So like Brady said, guys, go to our community. Okay, so the community is going to be an amazing spot for all of this. So community.carrot.com. We're going to be live streaming the Evergreen Marketing Show there on Thursdays. We're going to be doing Q&A over there after that. So if you want your site analyzed, you have some questions, we're going to be there for a little bit after that live stream every single week. 100% focus on marketing, right? It's like SEO, content marketing, Google pay-per-click conversion. That's pretty it. SEO, content marketing, let's say paid ads, not just Google pay-per-click and conversion. We're going to go crazy deep there, make it the best spot on the internet as a high margin service business in real estate, HVAC, any of those ones we're going to go into in the future. If you're listening to this in the future, go there. This is going to post like you were mentioning every Thursday. So the Evergreen Marketing Show is going to be every Thursday on the podcast, and we'll have YouTube versions chopped up somewhere, I'm sure, and on social. So you guys will be getting little pieces and parts of it. Entrepreneur Freedom Formula is going to be a change in format, which I'm pumped about, because I did this on the cell phone for so many years. I may work that back in as we go, but we're going to start with once a week, and it's going to be video format. So it's going to be me here in my office, just speaking to camera. But if you're listening to this on the podcast version, the same types of podcasts, sub 20 minutes or sub 30 minutes for sure. Just about my entrepreneurship journey, really digging in, but you're going to get a video version of that too, guys. So that's going to be posted on my personal YouTube channel. So we'll link up all that stuff there, and that's going to go over onto my personal IG. So you're going to be able to get the Entrepreneur Freedom Formula side of building your business that you never want to retire from, that you love, that helps build freedom and impact. That's gonna be that part of it. personal YouTube channel. We'll link it up. And eventually I'm going to have a written newsletter on that too, sometime this year. Yeah. So every episode is going to turn into a written newsletter that you guys will be able to get. Just keep an eye out. We'll let you know where you're going to be able to get that here soon.
Sweet.
I think we've got the bases covered there, dude. One other thing on the Entrepreneur Freedom Formula that I'm excited about. So we're going to start by doing these weeklies like this. What I want to work towards is probably a monthly interview with a person that's like a hero of mine that I'm like, I wanted to interview that person for a while.
Yeah.
Once a month, dig in with this author who I'm digging on his or her book. And it's like, no, I want to get them on this thing. Or an amazing mentor, or just someone who's performing at such a high level. I want to aim by mid this year to do one amazing interview per month.
Yeah.
And get back into that. Cause that was one of the things I love the most about the podcast is being able to bring those people in like Mike McCallowitz and Bob. Yeah. So that we'll bring that back on the entrepreneur side of things sometime this year, but probably on the monthly basis moving forward.
Sweet, man. Well, cool. That's a wrap. We'll see you guys on the podcast. We'll see you soon on YouTube. March 12th, Entrepreneur Freedom Formula launches. Check it out in your podcast app. March 14th, Evergreen Marketing Podcast Live. Join us in the community. And if you ever have any questions, any comments, find me on Facebook or shoot me an email, brady@carrot.com. I'd love to chat with y'all. And thank you so much.
Huge.
Thank you for allowing us to do a podcast for almost 8 years. I really appreciate you guys as listeners. We don't take that lightly. Having an audience and having people listen to our stuff, it means a lot. So thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Next time you guys listen, the picture's going to change. Evergreen Marketing is going to be the new podcast. Keep an eye out, guys. Appreciate y'all.
Yeah.
Boom.
All right. We'll see you later.